Hi, Penny. Welcome to the show.
Hiya, John. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Well, I've been wanting to have you on the show for a while. You and I, we go way back. We'll talk a little bit about that, just a little bit, not too much, and how important that is to me.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you live, and how you wrote books, and when did you start doing that?
Oh, just a little bit. Is
Just a
that
little
that's
bit,
just a little bit,
a,
is
a
it?
little
Okay.
backstory. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I was born in Toronto and I went to the University of Toronto, studied literature and psychology, but I really wanted to travel. So I began to travel seriously in about 1971. And I have been around the world 3 times. Um, I met my husband, my late husband, on a Yugoslavian freighter going to Morocco. So no more freighters, no more Yugoslavia, but there's still Morocco. So that was a while ago. But yeah, I've done a lot of serious traveling, and I think a lot of it was in search of story. I I was lucky enough to take a job. When I got out of university, I could read and write and type. I had learned to type when I was about 12 years old. My mother sent me to learn to type. So, because I wanted to travel, I wasn't interested in a career path. I just wanted a job that would, so I could save money. And between trips, I got a job in a documentary film company, and that sort of set me on the road towards editing. Now, my cousin, who is, I would say, the best documentary editor in Canada, he's now retired. Anyway, he happened to be working upstairs in the place where I was working. And so I used to go up after work and sit and watch him. And I became very intrigued by the whole editing process. And through one thing and another, um, took a job freelance as an assistant editor to Eric Rate. I don't know if you remember
I
him.
do remember him. Yeah. Yeah.
He was one of the best
Yeah.
editors in Canada, English trained.
Hmm.
And so I was an assistant picture editor. And I really, when I thought about it after, I was first talking to you, I remember now that I went into film editing because I thought it would be a good way to learn how to structure story.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I think that it is. I think because, in a film, you have to tell a complicated story in under 2 hours generally.
Yeah.
And film editing is how you do that, really.
Yeah.
And so that was a wonderful education for me. But I did move into sound because in those days it was very difficult to get in Canada to get picture editing jobs. There weren't that many to go around, but sound editing involved crews. So, there were more jobs available. And I guess I had a knack for it anyway, but I really enjoyed it. So I was a sound editor for roughly 20 years. And that's when you came into my life at one point.
Hmm.
And I loved that. I did love it. We went digital in the late 80s. I did that too, but it changed the whole lifestyle of the job, shall we say. Um, and uh, it was very difficult to make a living, you may well remember.
It got to be that way. Yeah.
It got to be that way. And so I then sort of, I guess you could say, segued into book editing, which it took me about 4 years to get there. And I realized that editing is editing. I mean, you either have a mind for it or you don't. You either have a sense of structure and how things are supposed to, you know, this goes here, this is in, this is out, this goes here, this goes there, you
Sure.
know,
Sure.
and it doesn't matter what the medium is, I
No.
discovered.
Mhm.
It's the same process. So I was very lucky that I fell into a second career that was satisfying, and I really I still do it. I still
Mm.
do it, but not as much. I don't do the big jobs anymore. I guess you could say I'm sort of semi-retired now.
Mhm.
Um, and one of the things that I learned from sound editing was a sense of dialogue, how people talk,
Right.
you know, and I used to listen to people talking, you know, if I was in a room or a public place or a washroom or whatever, I would listen to people talk. And um, I think, you know, it helped give me it helped to give me an ear for dialogue. Um, so yes, I think I was very fortunate that I got on that path because I really always did want to be a writer. And I think that approaching it that way maybe was unique. A lot of people don't do it that way, but I think it was good for me. It was
Mhm.
good for me.
Yeah. Tell you the truth, that's how I approach it. I wanted to write. I wanted to write a book
Yeah.
ever since the early 2000s. I just didn't know how to go about it. With the help of another editor, get me into reality television show editing. I did my first show, then I had something under my wing, and with that I got a second show and so forth. And for
Yeah.
12 years I cut reality television. I
Wow.
guess the most impressive thing that I did was Survivor Man. You may remember that with Les Stroud.
Uh-huh.
And
Yes.
people like that show, so they think that I'm a good editor, and I was. And the funny thing is, you see, some producers refer to me wrongly, of course, as the ADR guy. What they call ADR was not ADR. What it was is they want these participants to say things that they never said before. And of course, we hide the
Oh,
edits under B-roll. We change everything they said because now the producer says, no, we want the story to go this way. So I was forced to do that. And so
ah,
when I finally had to retire at age 60, because I had a brain aneurysm, and that was basically the end of my career. And I got better. I wanted to write, and I thought, okay, this is going to be very intimidating. And I realized with my first novel that what I'm doing here is the same thing that I did for those 12 years. I'm creating a story because before that,
inventing. Yes.
yeah. So everything you said
Yeah.
resonates with me, um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and certainly when I was making all those edits, making people say things that they never said. I have to say, I thought of you and Sharon because
Did you?
the two of you showed me about, don't do double breaths and all these little tips. I'm creating words in some cases, It
Yes.
was really
Yes.
fun. So I thank
Well,
you for
one of
that.
the things that I, well, my pleasure. One of the things that I was sometimes hired for, especially by Sharon and Michael, was, and this I did this in Moonstruck actually. Um, they wanted to create a conversation. They did a lot of, remember what we called wild tracks, where the sound guy would go around and he would just get people to say things, you know, sentences or whatever. And so they had all these wild tracks, and they wanted a conversation to be happening in the background in this hairdressing salon when Cher is getting her hair done. And I guess I had done it often enough and had a bit of a reputation, you know, for being able to, as you say, create sentences and conversations out of nothing, a bunch of words, really.
Yeah.
And that was fun and challenging. But yeah, it still always comes down to story, you know.
Yeah.
Everything really is a story and has a story. Now, I once worked on editing and compiling and editing a thesaurus from scratch. And that was extremely difficult because there was no story. There was no story. It was just words, 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 words. And you really had to focus on that. But otherwise, I think that I've always loved the story and have always looked for the story and things.
Yeah.
Um, and the reason I finally sat down, I think it was in about 1984, and wrote my first novel. It was before telefilm. It was when there was, I forget what the government program was that supported film in Canada.
Mhm.
Oh, I should have thought about that. But anyway, the whole idea was they would get sort of small amounts of money from a lot of people like doctors and dentists and that, and get them invest in film. Anyway, it just fell apart, and suddenly there was no work.
Mhm.
And I had to actually go out and get a real job. And I hated that. I had a job working for a large PR company, mainly because a friend of mine knew someone and got me a job there. But I really, I hated it. And it was a bad, bad time in my life. My father was very ill. He was dying, and he was only 62. And I, I just sort of looked around and I thought, if this is my life, I I don't like it. I don't like it. And so I did one of those, funny when I think about it, I did one of those visualization things, where you sit
Mhm.
down and you just close your eyes and you think, if I could be anywhere doing anything, what would it be? And I saw myself in a hot place, a warm place, which is where I am now. I've been living in Asia now for almost 20 years. I lived in Thailand for 3 years, and I've lived here in Malaysia now for 15 years. So I'm living in a hot place, and I was a writer. And that's when I just said, okay, well, I put a piece of paper in the typewriter. So it was 1984. And I wrote chapter 1. And I sat down, and my husband helped me, sort of work out a plot kind of thing. I decided to write a mystery because I love reading them. And mysteries are very structured, and you work towards an outcome, a solution.
Yeah.
And I thought that might be an easy thing to do. And I just started writing it.
Yeah.
And it took me 15 years to get it published.
Yeah. Things were different back then, right?
Well, I got hit right in the transition when publishing changed from being an industry that loved books, and publishers would nurture what they thought were good writers. And they would support them and support their business from the best-selling writers, the popular writers, the best-selling writers. The best story about this is, I don't know if you know Ann Tyler.
No.
She wrote The Accidental Tourist, which
Okay.
was made into a movie. Now, Ann Tyler, The Accidental Tourist was her 7th novel. It was, sorry, I can't think of who the publisher was right now. It might have been Knopf, because they were very supportive of writers. But anyway, they published all of her books in hardcover and never made a dime until the 7th one, which was The Accidental Tourist.
Mm.
And that one made money and made her name,
Yeah.
was made into a movie. That doesn't happen anymore. That doesn't happen anymore, where a writer will, the publishers will actually nurture a writer. And in the late, sort of, mid to late 80s, when I was trying to get published, publishing became a business where every book had to make a profit. Every book had to make a profit. And that's what we see now. We see the, big conglomerates, Bertelsmann in Europe and Random House, and, they own all these small publishers. You may not, people probably aren't even aware of that, but there are really only a few big companies that run publishing. And so consequently, they're looking for hits, they're looking for bestsellers. And the other thing is, so are the agents. So it's, in a way, it's harder to get an agent now than to get a publisher, because the agents need to make a living. And so everybody's looking for the next blockbuster, you know?
Yeah. Well,
So it does make it difficult. And of course, you know that well. You've gone into self-publishing. I have not self-published yet, but I've been working on my 5th novel for a while now. It's a difficult one to write. But I asked myself, will I be able to get it published, even though I've had 4 novels
yeah.
published? I can't get an agent. I've tried.
Hmm.
You know?
Well, the music industry certainly went down that same route around the same time too. The
Yes,
80s
yes,
music was interesting compared to the 70s music. Not all of it was good, but neither was all the 70s music good. But what did change, and I left the film industry around the time when you started writing this book,
Mm,
your first book. And the
mhm.
reason I knew that you wrote books is because Michael O'Farrell was a fan of whatever band I was in. He would show up all the time.
Ah,
And we remained friends and got together. And he told me about you
yes.
that, oh, Penny's decided to write a book. And
Oh,
that was the news that I heard. And go, really? Penny's writing a book? How interesting is that? And many years later, I got a show called Tell Me About Your Book. And here you are.
well, interesting what you just said. It just made me remember that one of the things I did at the time was I told everybody I was writing a book, because I thought, it's very easy to abandon it. You start writing, you think, oh, because it's a lot harder than you think it's going to be. You have to work hard and you have to be disciplined, and real life gets in the way all the time. So I thought, okay, I'm going to tell everybody I'm writing a book so that people will say to me, so how's the book coming? Are you writing? How's the book coming? And I would have to
Yep.
say, oh,
You're
yes,
committed now. Yeah.
yes, it's coming along. I've written another chapter. So I tricked myself into finishing the book, and it worked.
Good.
I went
Yeah.
public. I just thought,
Yeah.
this way I can't abandon it. I can't say to people, I gave that up.
Yeah.
That would
Right.
be
Right.
shameful. That would be shameful.
Yeah. What's the name of that first book?
Well, actually, interestingly, the first one I wrote is not the first one that was published. By the time I did get published, I had 2 books finished. The first one is that I wrote is called If Only to Say Goodbye. I wanted to call it A Long Way from Home, because one of the things I do is I send my characters out of their comfort zone. All of my books take place in Asia, somewhere in Asia, and that one took place in Thailand. And I sent my main character out of her comfort zone. I sent her to Thailand, and she was a long way from home, and I wanted to call it that. But then when the publishers did a search, there was at least 3 other books called A Long Way from Home.
That's important to do.
Yeah, so I had to come up with another titles are hard. They're the hardest. So that one was called If Only to Say Goodbye. And interestingly, when I first wrote it, I wrote it in the first person, which is very limiting. I don't know if you've done that. It's very limiting when you write in the first person, because you can only see, the reader can only see through the narrator's eyes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I wrote the second book I wrote, but the first one that was published was called Some Comfort Among Us. And it takes place mainly in an ashram in India. And that one I wrote, I planned it very carefully. I did chapter by chapter plans and everything, because it was a more complex story. And I wrote that in the third person. And I went back and rewrote the other book in the third person, which was a very interesting exercise.
I bet.
and I hope made it a better book. But anyway, the second book I wrote was the first one that was published. And then the first book I wrote was published next. And as I say, it took 15 years. And I had an agent. I had a New York agent, Curtis Brown, back in the 80s. And they were getting what in those days was called positive rejections. Positive rejections. We like the book, we like the writing, we like this, we like that, but, you know, we're not publishing it this year or whatever. And Curtis Brown at that time, you know, that was a good thing. But then when I submitted the second book, because the first one still hadn't been published, well, it wasn't anything like the first book. And this was another thing that was happening around that time, was that publishers had started picking up series. I think it was James Patterson who started that, where basically they're writing the same book, because the feeling was that if people like this book, they want to read the same thing again. Well, my second book wasn't anything like my first book. They've all been one-offs, and that made me a marketing problem, apparently. Who knew?
Yeah.
So that's
Well,
why
that just
it
rings
took.
so true with so many things. So many things. Yeah.
Mhm.
I
It's
got good at, well, I got contracts doing people buying houses, choosing one of three houses, or renovating houses, something to do with houses. And then I went to apply for a contract that was being offered about motorcycling. And if you remember, I rode a motorcycle.
Yeah.
And I eventually got a gold wing, and I toured all over the place with it. So I thought, oh, I have this in the bag. And they said, no, you do home renovation editing. That's what you do. Well,
Yeah.
I could edit anything. I didn't get that job. But instead, a couple of days later, I was offered a contract, a very good contract, for Say Yes to the Dress. And I go, okay, well, thank you. I know nothing about wedding dresses. They're white. Women wear them on their wedding day. That's about all I knew.
Get out.
But no problem.
That was you?
I
That
did,
was you?
yeah, yeah. And I did 2 seasons of that. And guess what? It was easy to edit, because editing is editing. I don't care what it is.
Yeah, really. That's funny.
You can't go
Yeah.
outside your lane anymore. As a musician, you must do the same thing you did on
Yes.
your last
Yeah.
album. If it deviates in the slightest bit, no,
That's right.
we don't know how to market
That's
that.
right.
Yeah,
That's
weird.
right.
Very
No,
weird.
I know. I just as an aside, I have Netflix, and just this week I watched the Clive Davis documentary.
Oh yeah.
I highly recommend it. He is a remarkable individual, and he breaks all those rules, and he has what they call the golden ear. He just knows a hit, and he nurtures artists, and you know, in
Right.
the old-fashioned way. And he is a remarkable individual. It's well worth
Well,
having a look.
I'm familiar with who he was. Is he
Yes.
still, he's still
Oh
alive,
yeah,
is he?
he's 90.
Oh,
He's 91 or
okay.
something or
All right.
more, and he's still working. I think the first artist he signed was Janis Joplin.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like a real straight guy, you know, a suit guy. And he was a lawyer by profession and education. And I won't go into the story of how he ended up being, you know, music agent for musicians. But he heard Janis Joplin perform live a lot. Janis and the Holding Company.
Yeah, sure.
That was her first band, and he heard her and he said, "Whoa, she's something." So you know, this is a great guy.
Of course, both my wife and I like the music of Janis Joplin, and we've commented by watching things like American Idol and The Voice. And I said, you know, if a Janis Joplin came around today, the chairs wouldn't turn. They would never make it to the top 20 even. They would be rejected. That's where we're at.
This is why the Clive Davis thing, I think you'd find it interesting to watch, because he just You know, he had everyone from Barry Manilow to Whitney Houston to Aretha Franklin to,
Hmm.
you know, I
Wow.
mean, just really Lou Reed. I mean, he
Hmm.
was,
All over the
if
place.
if
Yes.
he if it was good, it, you know, if he thought it was good, he
Yeah.
went for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing. But yeah, that's very rare now. You're right. It
Yeah.
doesn't seem to happen. There's too much I don't know, cookie cutter
Even
kind of.
with producers, because you mentioned him, and I think of Bob Ezrin from Toronto. He did Kiss, Pink Floyd, you know, diversely different sounds. So I thought when I was going through music that, okay, maybe I don't want to be a performer because it's too stringent what I have to do. I like to
Mm,
get into producing so I can produce different types of bands, different types of artists, and get that because I like diversity a lot.
mhm,
But even
mhm.
amongst producers now, it's gotten that way.
Yeah, because it's a bottom line mentality,
Yeah.
you know, we have to answer to the um, stock shareholders, you know,
Hmm.
uh,
Hmm.
and it's all about the bottom line.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate, I think. That's the way that, you know.
Yeah. Now, you wrote these books. You live in Malaysia. You're obviously doing well. Did they make enough money for you to continue living, or do you have to do other things?
Don't give up your day job. No, I couldn't give up my day job. No,
Which
no,
is
no, no.
editing books?
Which is editing books, but I never made much money. I never really worked for money. I worked for love.
Mm,
And
wow.
at this stage in my life, I can look back and say how fortunate I was that I had two professions that I just loved, you know, and I was good at, and they were satisfying and creative. Not many people can say that. But one of the reasons I live in Malaysia is not just the weather. It's because I can't afford to live in Canada.
Hmm.
I just can't. I don't have enough money. But I have enough money to live very nicely here,
Right.
you know, because I was freelance from 1977. So there was no company pension, no job pension or anything like that, you know, just that little bit of RSP that I set aside and was smart enough to put with a broker rather than try and manage it myself. And yeah,
Well,
you know, CPP and OAS. And
seems like I
but here,
copied you, except I didn't go as far as Malaysia. I went to Nova
yeah,
Scotia.
yeah.
I couldn't
Uh,
stay in Toronto. I couldn't afford it.
oh,
So,
no, a one bedroom apartment is over $2,000 a month.
yeah.
And I did say a long time ago, I said, I'm not going to be old and poor in a cold country.
Yeah.
I just, I'm just not. And I guess I was lucky in the sense that I could leave my home, leave Canada. And I'm one of those people that takes everything with me in my heart. So I never feel far away. And
Hmm.
here we are in the age of Zoom and WhatsApp and Signal and, you know, email and everything. So for me, even though I'm exactly halfway around the world,
Yep.
it doesn't feel that way to me.
Mm.
It really doesn't, you know. I mean, I have video conversations with my friends and keep in touch just with WhatsApp and whatever. And it literally is keeping in touch because you just have to even just send a comment or a joke and they know you're alive and well. When I was traveling back in the 70s and the 80s, whoa, you had to send letters, right? You had to
Hmm.
send
Yeah.
through the post office. And you would say, well, I'm going to be in Tehran in December. So send a letter there to, we used to pick them up at American Express or Post Restaurant, whatever. And so you could wait months to hear from somebody, and making a phone call, was impossible. That took all day and cost a fortune. You'd have to go to the PTT, which is the Post Telegraph and Telephone, and, you know, give them the number you wanted to call and then sit down and wait for a phone to be free. It was unbelievable, but
Wow.
you know,
Yeah.
when you think of what we can do now.
Yeah.
Um, I have a funny story, actually. There was a point, uh, where was I? I think I was in Afghanistan, and I got a letter from my good friend, who's still a good friend. She'd been a neighbor. And she just says in the letter, she says, well, your parents moved on Saturday. That's all. Like, she thought I knew my parents were moving. Well, I didn't get that letter from my mother that said, we've sold the house and we're moving here. So for 3 months, I did not know where my parents were. Now, they didn't know where I was half the time, but that's different. Not knowing where your parents are was a very strange feeling, but it took me 3 months to find out where they were.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did go on some interesting journeys. I remember when we worked on the wars after that, or around that time, you took some time off as we did. And back in those days, it was great because we always had summers off, which is perfect. And you went to someplace like Kyrgyzstan or someplace like that, and
Well,
you and Oki were like hiking through some places that I wouldn't dare walk through. It seemed dangerous. Were you ever, did you ever get yourself into some tricky situations?
yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. The first trip I took after I met him on the ship going to Morocco was overland to India. And that involved, going through North Africa and Southern Europe, and then Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, places that you don't go anymore. And that was in the early 70s. I did that trip 3 times, went through there 3 times. And at one point, I actually had pneumonia in Pakistan. I was in the hospital. And after 7 days, they let me out, and we got on a train and went into India with my medication and my, because I think I was driven. I think I was just driven. I had to see the world. I had to see what was out there. And, you know, some of the hardest travel I did, though, was, and the most dangerous, was in South America, if you can believe it.
Hmm.
So we mostly traveled by road. Only flew when we had to, and that would be if we had to cross an ocean, although the Atlantic we crossed twice by ship, but the Pacific we did fly.
Mhm.
And but going through the Andes by bus was treacherous and dangerous, and because you never knew when the roads would be wiped out. One time the sort of was not, it was sort of an extended station wagon, with, I don't know, 6 people in it, caught fire in the middle of nowhere. That was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, lots of adventure.
I'm surprised you haven't written dozens of books. My goodness, all these stories. It's great. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I don't know why I haven't written about any of that. I talk about it sometimes, but
Yeah.
interestingly, when I came back, people weren't all that interested in where I'd been. I'm not sure why, but maybe it was
Yeah.
just kind of overwhelming.
My wife said to me in 2019 that I should write a book about my mountain climbing adventures, which I climbed from age 15 to age 48, 49 in and around Lake Placid, the high peaks region of the Adirondack Mountains. And sure, I had plenty of really amazing experiences.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
thought about it. And I thought, yeah, maybe. But if I write about that, how many books have been written about climbing through the high peaks of the Adirondack region? I'm sure there's all kinds. And who should care about whether I climbed those mountains as well? So instead, I decided to tell a story that involves mountain climbing. It's not about mountain climbing, it's about something else altogether. But in the parts where the mountains are being climbed, well, I know all about that. So I can make it sound really realistic. And so I incorporated my experiences, not just mountain climbing, but all my other experiences, my religious experience. I was a Christian
Yes.
for a while, and then I stopped being one, and that
Uh-huh.
that created a lot of problems in my life. So I just took all of that and put it into fiction form,
Yes.
and that works much better.
I actually agree. I mean, of my 4 books, one takes place in Thailand, one takes place in India on an ashram, one takes place actually in China. That was the third book where I put a lot of history. I've started putting more history in my books because I really love the research. But in my reading, I discovered that there was a fascinating period of time, a kind of an arc in the history in and around Shanghai, mainly from about, I forget, 1907 to 1929, and there was huge changes going on, and so I used that as kind of a backdrop for the story. And then the last book takes place in Canada and in Hong Kong in 2 different time periods. So yes, I incorporate what I know of these places, and having been in Asia so many times and for so long, I fell in love with Asia really in 1972, which was when I first came to Asia. And I don't know, I don't know, it just something just clicked. So all of my books take place in Asia, and that's, I guess, how I express where I've been and
Yeah.
what I've seen. And again, I take my characters out of their comfort zone and I send them far away to a place that they have never been, and they have to survive. They somehow have to, and that's in a sense what I did with my life, you know.
Yeah.
I had my trial by fire. I had to find out what I was made of.
Hmm.
And and essentially I did, you
Yeah.
know.
You seem very happy where you are.
I like it here. It feels like home. One of the things that happened with all the traveling that I did, because I would say out of a decade, the 70s, the early 70s to the early 80s, I spent 4 years on the road. Not 4 years all at once, but 4 years out of that decade were spent on the road. And what happened was I didn't feel at home anywhere. I always came back to Toronto for family reasons. And but I never felt at home anywhere anymore. I don't know. I was just felt like an alien.
Yeah.
Um, and for some reason in this place, Penang, it feels like home.
Good.
I can't explain that, but it's a good fit for me anyway. It seems to be a good fit. It has a multiracial, population, which of course, so does Canada, which is one of the best things about Canada. Um, it's a food paradise, an absolute food paradise, which I like.
Hmm.
And people here are very kind. I've made friends from of all different, you know, nationalities, races, cultures, and that's interesting to me. And another thing I've learned by, I guess, being an expat, um, is what good people Canadians are.
Hmm.
Never thought I'd say that, but they really are fine people. And when you are, you know, in the world with people from all over, I've found that Canadians are very decent, nice people.
And they're viewed that way by the people
They're
you.
viewed that way for a reason,
Yeah.
because in fact, they are,
Yeah.
they really are, which is kind of nice,
Yeah. Well, my father specifically chose Canada to emigrate after they became Hungarian refugees after the revolution in 56.
Yeah,
They considered all these different countries, and he says, Canada's looks by the brochures that were before him to be the best place. And I'm glad he
yeah.
chose it. Though when I was
Except,
kid, I wanted to be American. They had better chocolate bars. Or so
Well,
I thought.
and then there's the weather. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, I never, people say to me, I'm living in a hot place and I really can't tolerate the cold. And they say, oh, well, you know, you become acclimatized to the hot weather, you know, it's tropical. And I think to myself, no, I did live most of my life in Canada and I never got acclimatized to the cold.
Yeah. Well,
Never.
I can understand that.
Just,
Where
you
I live
know,
now, I have to chop wood and burn wood to keep warm. In my 60s, that's what I got to
yeah,
do. Man, do I
yeah.
miss a thermostat.
I believe it.
Now,
Well, you know,
the rainy season that comes upon you at times, what's that like?
yeah, there's two monsoons. Well, it's not like it rains constantly. It hardly ever rains all day. It'll rain very hard for 10 minutes or 20 minutes, and it might rain 2 or 3 times a day.
Okay.
But it's not like it's gloomy and it rains all the
Okay.
time. It doesn't. It's more, you know, sporadic, but there is basically the wet season and the dry season.
Hmm.
And right now we're getting into the cooler, drier season. And I live in a condo and there's a pool here, an outdoor pool. And I can tell you the water's getting kind of chilly.
Hmm.
But hey, I'm a Canadian, right?
Right.
But yeah, the weather's kind of rough in Canada,
Yeah.
and we're lucky here. Although the tsunami did hit the
Oh,
year
yeah.
before, it
Yeah.
hit actually the coastline here where I'm living, but I'm up on a hill. We wanted to come in 2004, but we had a house to sell and we just couldn't get ready, so we didn't come until 2005,
Okay.
and we went then to Thailand. But it was in the you know, around the turn of the century, when we got Netscape, because my husband and I had always wanted to retire in Asia, and our favorite place was Sri Lanka, which of course had was at war for 20 years, civil
Yeah.
war for 20 years, so we couldn't go there. But anyway, around when we got Netscape, I said to him, you know what, we can go now.
Yeah.
Because I have an invisible profession. I've always thought editing was an invisible profession because if anyone can see you, then you're not doing your job
Hmm.
properly.
That's
You
right.
know,
Yeah.
if they can see the, the mechanics of the work, um, then it's not good enough. And therefore editing and the editor is invisible, needs to be invisible, you
Yeah.
know? And I said, we can go now
Hmm.
because I can do this with the internet.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
someone told me recently I was a digital nomad
Mm. Sure.
back in
That
the
sounds about right. Yeah.
back in 2005. And I guess I
Wow.
am because
Yeah.
I was again very lucky that that worked out for me. I was able to work, even though there is a 12-hour time change from, say, Toronto, but you know, you work it out.
Yeah. You said you're working on a new book. It's taking you some time.
Yeah, I have been working on my fifth book for a while, and I encountered structural problems, if you can believe it,
Hmm.
you know, the structure queen, because I had my main character disappear for 25 years. And that was a problem. That turned out
Hmm.
to be a problem.
Yeah.
And so I've restarted it and refocused it a couple of times. I've done about, I don't know, 30,000 words, you know, and revised it. I have a plan. So it's not finished yet, but it might take me a long time.
Hmm.
But yeah, I
Are you gonna self-publish that one?
don't know what I'm gonna do. It's a tough one. I probably will try and have it published, but you know,
Yeah.
if you're not the flavor of the month and looking at me, I think you can see I'm not the flavor of the month.
Mm.
You know, I don't know if I'll be able to. So I think about it occasionally, but I'll really have to cross that bridge when I come to it. It's not a reason not to write the book, but yeah,
Yeah,
when you write a book, you would like to get it out there and get
for
people
sure,
to.
for sure.
The thing about self-publishing, because I get asked by writers, you know, that I edit about self-publishing, and you, I don't have to tell you this, but it's one thing to make a book and publish it, but then you do have to sell it. And that's the hard part,
Hmm.
you know,
That's right.
because essentially at least with your first book or your first two, you're nobody from nowhere. How do you get noticed? And there are so many books coming
Millions
out.
every year.
Yeah, so many.
Yeah.
And how do you market and sell your book? And for me, that's daunting. You know, it's not in my nature.
Yeah.
It did take me 15 years to get my book published, the first one published, 15 years. And because it was, I think it was around, I meant to look it up. I think it was around 1999 or 2000. And I had started writing it in 84. And there was a point at which I thought, and I had two books written. There was a point at which I thought, you know what? Maybe you should just give up. Maybe you're just not good enough. What, you know, I mean, nobody wants to publish you. You keep getting, I've got a stack of rejection letters. And I thought, maybe you just need to give it up, move on, do something else. And believe it or not, my 80-year-old self, who I'm actually looking at now, just sort of came to me and said, you were going to give up at 50? And I went, oh, of course not. You don't give up at 50. You don't ever give up. And from that point on, I said, giving up is not an option. That became my mantra.
Yeah, I totally agree. And maybe not with those exact words, but I say that I'll never stop doing what I'm doing, whether that's music or any other creative thing that I do. You'll know when I stop because I'll be dead. That's it.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
You don't stop.
Yeah.
You don't stop.
So I'm not
Yeah.
that concerned whether my books sell or not. Of course, I would rather have people read it and tell me that they like it. Even people, I interviewed
Yes.
many authors, and some of them sell hundreds of books a month, but still, as self-published or hybrid publishing, which can cost a lot of money because you're paying your company and whatever. But it's not enough for them to feed their family. They still have jobs, and they're quite
That's
successful
right.
as self-published people. So
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
not doing this for money. No one's doing this for money.
No,
Unless you're
there are
Stephen
very
King or something like
few.
that. Yeah.
There really are very few writers or very few musicians for that matter who make a lot of money. We think there are a lot because, you know, they're famous and we know who they are.
Yeah.
But when in terms of all of the writers and all of the musicians that are plugging away, no, not many of them make. I read a statistic several years ago that in Canada, the average earnings of I think a fiction writer or a published writer was something like $11,000. So,
Yeah.
you know, sounds about right.
Yeah, it's not easy to make money, and money is what we need. So the
No,
idea for me,
time is what we need,
time
John.
is right, and,
Time
and
is
and be at peace
important.
with yourself. You know, find that peace within you. However you do it. You moved to Malaysia. I moved to Nova Scotia. I got remarried.
And it helps to do what you love. It
Exactly. Yeah,
definitely helps to do
I'm
what you
free to
love.
do that. I'm free to. I can do anything I want,
There you
and I
go.
enjoy that.
Good.
Penny, it's been so nice talking to you.
Thank you, John. I've enjoyed it too. It's been lovely.
Thank you.
Anytime, call me up.
Okay, maybe we can just chat
Okay.
sometimes. Okay.
Oh, that would be nice.
Well, you take care of yourself.
I promise. You too.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching. And before you go, if you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and don't forget to ring that bell for future notifications. You can even leave a comment. All of that really helps in recommending this channel to a larger audience. And if you are an author, I would love to speak with you about your book. Until next time, keep on writing and be kind to one another.